I'm Chloe Bennett, I'm 22, and up until the morning of my birthday, I still believed, naively, that being the reliable daughter meant something. That maybe, just maybe, I'd finally be seen. I was wrong. That text message changed everything. Sold your laptop, Haley needs a new phone. Be grateful we feed you. And then, a second message, colder than the first. Also, you'll cover her tuition, $6,000, by Friday. It took everything in me not to cry right there in the break room of the cafe where I worked. I was mid-shift, apron still on, and my hands shook as I typed back 2 words that I knew would cost me everything. No chance. The reply was instant. Then get out. You're cut off. So I left. Quietly. Just like always. But this time, I didn't leave empty-handed. And by the time they found what I'd left behind, it was too late. My sister was panicking, my mother was screaming, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. Before I take you deeper into this story, let me ask, have you ever had to stand up to the very people who were supposed to protect you? Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? If you've ever faced family betrayal or had to find your voice in the silence, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. You're not alone. Now, let me take you back to how this all began. I grew up in Pine Hill, Oregon, a small town tucked between the Cascades and the kind of silence you can't escape. My parents always said they kept me home for my own good, that commuting to college would build character, that living under their roof meant I was lucky. But the truth? I wasn't saving money. I was losing myself. That morning, my 22nd birthday, I rolled out of bed at 5:45 a.m. for my early shift at Maple and Mornings, a diner with chipped mugs, bottomless coffee, and regulars who remembered more about me than my family ever did. I dressed quickly, grabbed the laptop I'd spent nearly a year saving for, and tiptoed downstairs. My mom, Linda, was already in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone while the Keurig hummed behind her. "Happy birthday, Chloe," she muttered, eyes glued to her screen. "Thanks, Mom," I said, waiting for something. A hug, a card, hell, even a sticky note with a smiley face. Nothing. "Oh, and don't forget, you need to drive Haley to her friend's party this afternoon." Right. Because birthdays don't mean much when your younger sister has somewhere more important to be. The laptop sat on the counter, my pride and joy. A MacBook Pro, paid for entirely from tip jars and double shifts. Inside it, my thesis, job applications, digital art portfolio, and pieces of myself I couldn't replace. I slid it gently into my backpack and walked out the door without another word. The diner was packed, as usual, but my coworker Marla had remembered. She brought cupcakes with glittery sprinkles and a note scribbled in purple ink. "You make the best lattes, and you're the kindest soul in this place. Happy birthday, C." Even Tom, our manager who rarely cracked a smile, gave me a $25 gift card to the local bookstore. "You're one of the hardest workers I've seen in 10 years, he said, his gravelly voice softening. "You deserve a lot more than this town gives you." I smiled, even as something inside me ached. During my 15-minute break, I sat out back, sipping lukewarm coffee and listening to the hum of a distant highway. That's when the messages came. First the laptop, then the tuition demand, and finally the severing blow. Then get out. It hit me like a punch to the chest. They'd sold my laptop, without asking, without hesitation. And now they were demanding that I pay for Haley's 4th attempt at college after failing out of 3 others. I'd spent years being responsible. 2 jobs, a full course load, no vacations, no parties. And this? This was my reward? I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred. My hands clenched the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. When my shift ended, I hung up my apron slowly. Tom noticed. "You okay, Chloe?" he asked. "You look like you've just seen a ghost." "Just family stuff," I muttered. Nothing I can't handle. But deep down, I wasn't sure that was true anymore. As I drove my beat-up Toyota Corolla toward the only place that felt like safety, my best friend Nina's apartment, I knew I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. The guilt, the anger, the betrayal, they swirled inside me like a storm. But for the first time, there was also something else. A spark. A whisper in the back of my mind that said, maybe I don't have to play the quiet daughter anymore. And that's how the unraveling began. What came next would test everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the price of silence. I barely remember the drive to Nina's apartment, the familiar turns down Ridgefield Lane blurred together with the weight pressing on my chest. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unravel. But I knew better. I was wide awake, and this was mine. Every sharp edge of it. Nina opened the door before I could knock. One look at my face, and she didn't ask any questions, just pulled me into her arms and held me. "What happened?" she whispered. I couldn't speak, not right away. I just handed her my phone. Her eyes scanned the messages, her expression shifting from confusion to outrage. "Chloe, your dad sold your laptop? The one you saved for over a year to buy?" I nodded, biting back tears. "And now they expect you to pay for Haley's tuition? Again?" I collapsed onto her couch, the words spilling out in fragments. "It's always been like this, Nina. Every time she messes up, I'm the one who pays. Not just emotionally, literally." That night, as I sat in Nina's apartment with a mug of chamomile tea she made just the way I liked it, 2 sugars, no lemon, I found myself spiraling back into memories, ones I hadn't let myself think about in a long time. It wasn't just this birthday. It was every birthday. When I turned 16, my parents canceled my small sleepover party because Haley had a last-minute cheer tryout. At 18, the graduation money from my grandparents disappeared. My mom said they'd used it to help Haley buy her first car. At 21, I didn't even bother to mention my birthday. Haley was failing out of her second college by then, and the whole house was in damage control mode. "You've always been the mature one, Chloe," my mom would say, as if maturity was a substitute for affection. "Your sister needs more support right now." But right now stretched across a decade. Even in school, I was the invisible achiever. I made honor roll every semester, but it was Haley who got the attention when she made the JV volleyball team. I remember coming home one afternoon in high school after being accepted into a summer writing program in Seattle. I was practically vibrating with excitement. "Mom, I got in! They only chose 10 students from the entire state." But she barely looked up from her phone. "That's great, honey. Do you think you can drive Haley to her dental appointment today?" Nina had been there through all of it. "You've been carrying them for years," she said that night, her voice soft but firm. "They don't even see you. Not really." And she was right. It wasn't just emotional labor, it was financial, too. When our heater broke during a snowstorm last year, my parents couldn't cover the bill. I paid it silently. $680 I'd saved for new tires. When Haley cracked her phone screen for the 3rd time, I was the one who volunteered to cover it. And by volunteered, I mean I was told, "You make the most money. It's just logical." I worked 2 jobs while attending school full-time, barista in the mornings, dog walking app in the evenings. I'd become so used to sacrificing that I stopped noticing the weight of it. Until today. Today broke something in me. It was nearly midnight when Nina and I sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, surrounded by old notebooks, bank printouts, and bitter memories. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. So instead, I made lists. A list of every time they'd borrowed money, a list of every missed celebration, a list of every lie I'd been told about what was fair. "Chloe," Nina said gently, her voice cutting through the silence, "you don't have to keep proving your worth to them. You're enough. You've always been enough." And I broke down. Not from pain, but from the unfamiliar sensation of being seen. When I finally lay down to sleep on her pull-out futon, I stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. I thought about Haley's reaction when she finds out she doesn't get her tuition handed to her this time. I thought about my dad's voice, so matter-of-fact in that text. Then, get out. And somewhere between anger and grief, I made a quiet decision. I was done being silent, done being the responsible one, whose only reward was invisibility. Done being the fallback plan for a family that had no problem letting me break so they could stay whole. What came next wouldn't be easy. I knew that. But something had shifted. A small ember inside me had finally sparked. The next morning, I sat at Nina's kitchen table with my third cup of coffee and a pen in hand. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Writing down everything I've paid for," I replied. "Every dollar, every date, every lie. It's time I show them what I've really been carrying." Because the truth? They had no idea, but they were about to find out. By the time sunlight began to filter through Nina's kitchen curtains, I'd already drafted 5 pages. Itemized lists of payments I'd made since I turned 18. Bank transfers, Venmo logs, even cash withdrawals I remembered vividly. Every one of them tied to some urgent need from my parents or Haley. And not one of them ever repaid. I knew I wasn't going to win this with emotion. My parents were masters of guilt and gaslighting. I'd tried the heartfelt conversations. I'd tried the quiet obedience. Now, I was going to try the truth, cold, clear, and in black and white. "You're really doing this," Nina said, sliding a plate of toast across the table. "No more silence," I replied, my voice steady for the first time in days. And I meant it. Later that morning, I called Aunt Lila, my dad's older sister. She'd always been the quiet observer in our family, the one who noticed without interfering, who offered hugs at holidays and slipped birthday cards into my coat pockets when no one else remembered. "Chloe, sweetheart," she answered on the second ring. At least someone still sounded happy to hear from me. I hesitated for a second, then said, "Dad kicked me out, over a laptop, and Haley's tuition." There was a pause. "Oh, Chloe. I'm not surprised. I've been watching this unfold for years. You were always the one holding everything together while they let Haley fall apart without consequence." Her words felt like validation wrapped in sadness. "Come stay with me if you need to," she offered immediately. "But first, get your things, and if you can, leave behind the truth, something they can't ignore." I stared at the notepad in front of me. I already had it. I spent the rest of the day planning. I couldn't just walk into the house in broad daylight, not with emotions high and doors potentially locked. So I decided to go late. Quiet, strategic. I wasn't coming back, so I had to make this count. I called my manager at Maple in Mornings to let him know I'd be missing the next couple of shifts. "Family emergency," I said. "Take the time you need," Tom replied without hesitation. "But Chloe, if you need anything, money, food, a ride, don't be afraid to ask. You're one of the good ones." His words cracked something inside me. I hadn't expected kindness from anyone at this point, least of all my boss. That night, around 11:30 p.m., Nina drove me to my childhood home. The neighborhood looked the same, quiet, manicured lawns and yellow porch lights flickering like nothing had changed. But everything had. I still had my key. The lock clicked open as smoothly as ever. I stepped inside, my heart pounding. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and stale entitlement. Upstairs, I moved silently toward my room, trying not to wake anyone, until I saw the light beneath my door. It was cracked open, and inside, standing in front of my mirror, wearing my favorite navy blazer, was Haley. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharp and low. She jumped slightly, but didn't look embarrassed. "Trying stuff on," she said casually. "Dad said you were moving out anyway, so I figured I might as well see what fits." My hands curled into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. "That doesn't mean my clothes are up for grabs, Haley." She shrugged. "Mom said I could take what I want. You don't need business clothes for making cappuccinos. I didn't respond. Not because she was right, but because this wasn't about a blazer. This was about years of her walking into my room, taking what she wanted and getting away with it. "Where's my laptop?" I asked. "Dad sold it to Mr. Klein next door. His daughter's starting college. He got $200 for it. My new phone only cost $800, so I get to keep the rest." She smirked, as if she'd won, as if she had any right. I felt nauseous. "You do realize that laptop wasn't his to sell, right?" "Ugh, you're being so dramatic," she groaned, tossing the blazer onto the bed. "It's just a laptop, and anyway, you lived here rent-free." "Not anymore." "I never lived here rent-free, Haley. I've been paying bills for 3 years. That shut her up, but only for a second. "Well, whatever. You're moving out, so I guess I'm getting your room." I packed quickly. Important documents, clothes, a few photos. The watch Grandma May gave me when I graduated high school. Haley lingered in the doorway, watching me like I was part of some reality show, detached, unconcerned. "Are you really not paying my tuition?" she asked, like the idea was absurd. "No. Dad's going to lose it." "Let him." As I zipped my suitcase, she added one final blow. "He already promised the university, said it would be covered by Friday." I froze. So that's why the demand came out of nowhere. He made a promise, using money he had no right to offer. "Interesting," I muttered. "I guess he should have checked with me first." When Haley finally left my room, still wearing one of my sweaters, I got to work. From the loose floorboard under my desk, I pulled out my emergency fund, $2,700 in cash I'd been saving slowly, in secret, because I'd learned long ago not to trust bank accounts they had access to. Then I opened my closet and reached for the gray shoebox behind a row of boots. Inside were years of bank statements, receipts, unpaid IOUs, and utility bills with my name printed clearly across the top. It was time to tell the story no one had ever asked me to tell, one they wouldn't be able to ignore. Back at Nina's apartment, I didn't sleep, not a second. My body was exhausted, but my mind raced in relentless circles. I had everything: bank statements, receipts, Venmo screenshots, loan texts from my mom, even my original laptop purchase receipt. It was all there. Years of proof, years of silence, and I was finally ready to speak. While Nina brewed coffee, I sat cross-legged on her living room floor, with papers spread out like evidence at a crime scene. Because that's what it was, wasn't it? A slow, calculated robbery that no one ever called by name, because it came wrapped in the word family. "What are you going to do with all this?" she asked, her voice still thick with sleep. "I'm going to leave it on the kitchen table." "You mean, like a message?" "No, a mirror." Nina sat beside me, sifting through pages. "Your mom texted you to cover the water bill 4 times last year alone," she murmured, reading one aloud. "And your dad transferred money from your account. Wait, you never authorized this transfer." "He knew my password," I said quietly. "He always insisted on having access, just in case." She looked at me, eyes wide. "Chloe, this is financial abuse." I nodded. I knew. I'd known for years, but hearing someone else name it out loud hit different. By midday, I had it all organized. A full report broken into sections. 1. Unauthorized bank withdrawals. 2. Household expenses I'd paid. 3. Loans that were never repaid. 4. Theft and sale of my laptop. 5. The manipulation of my educational funds. I printed everything. Copies for me, one master folder for them. On the cover, I taped a simple note in my own handwriting. The truth about who's really been supporting whom. No more. We drove back to the house just after 3 a.m. Nina waited in the car, engine idling under the glow of the street lamp, while I moved through the shadows of my childhood like a ghost. The porch creaked the way it always did. The front door still stuck slightly at the bottom, just enough to remind me that this place had never been as perfect as it looked. Inside, everything was still. I stepped quietly into the kitchen and set the folder right in the center of the table, where the morning sun would hit it first. No dramatic notes, no threats, just facts, and a boundary, one they could no longer ignore. As I turned to leave, something on the fridge caught my eye. It was a magnet shaped like a sunflower, bright, plastic, and chipped at the edges. I'd made it in 3rd grade during art class. Back then, they'd taped it up proudly like it was a masterpiece. Now it held up one of Haley's latest report cards, another failed semester. Still, the word progress was written in my mom's handwriting across the top. It made my stomach twist. I walked out without touching it. The sun was beginning to rise when we got back to Nina's. I dropped my bags just inside her door and sank onto the couch, emotionally hollowed out but strangely lighter. "You okay?" she asked. "I don't know if I feel brave or broken," I whispered. "Both," she said gently, pulling a blanket over my shoulders. "And that's okay." A few hours later, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating off the edge of the table. 26 missed calls, 41 unread texts, 5 voicemails. They had found it. I could practically hear the screaming through the screen. The first message was from Haley. "What the hell did you do? Mom is crying and Dad's freaking out." Then came the texts from my mother. "How could you leave something like that for us to read? This is a family matter, not a courtroom. Please call us. Your father is very upset. We love you. Let's talk." And my father's messages, predictably, took a different tone. "Ungrateful. This is slander. You'll regret making enemies out of your own blood." I put the phone down. I didn't need to read more. I didn't owe them an immediate reaction. Nina appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs of coffee and a quiet smile. "Want to listen to one voicemail?" she asked gently. I nodded. She hit play on the speaker. The voice that came through wasn't angry. It was tired, soft. "Chloe, this is Aunt Lila. I just wanted to say I saw what you left, and I'm proud of you. You did what no one else had the courage to. I'm here if you need anything. Call me when you're ready." I swallowed hard. It was the first voice in that chorus of noise that felt like love. The truth was out now. No matter how they twisted it or yelled or cried, it was done. And I had no regrets. Because silence had never protected me. But maybe the truth finally would. The weight of it all didn't hit me until that afternoon. I'd spent the morning watching my phone light up like a slot machine. Messages from both my parents bouncing between rage and pleading, Haley swinging from insults to confusion. But what haunted me most were the voicemails that tried to sound like love, except now I knew the difference. Love doesn't manipulate. It doesn't punish you for drawing a boundary. It doesn't sell your laptop and call it discipline. So when Nina suggested a walk to clear our heads, I agreed, even though my legs felt like lead. We strolled through downtown Pine Hill, past the quiet bookshop where I used to dream of working, and the library where I'd written most of my freshman year essays. It was strange how everything around me looked the same, peaceful, unbothered, while I was unraveling from the inside out. "They don't get to decide who you are anymore," Nina said as we crossed Main Street. "You're not their scapegoat. You're not the family's emotional sponge. You're Chloe freaking Bennett." I smiled weakly, but her words stayed with me. Back at her apartment, I finally opened one of the voicemails from my mom. "Sweetheart, we were shocked by what you left, but you don't understand the whole picture. Your father and I have done everything for you. We put food on the table, a roof over your head. How could you turn on us like this? Please, call home. We need to clear this up." I stared at the wall as the message ended. Still no apology, still no accountability. Just the same script, flipped upside down now that they'd lost control. That's when Nina walked in, holding out a piece of paper. "You might want to sit down for this." It was a printout of an email chain. Subject line, Re-tuition promise, Haley Bennett. She'd pulled it from the university portal using Haley's login info because, of course, she'd reused the same password she'd given Nina years ago to borrow a Netflix account. And there it was. My father had already authorized Haley's tuition weeks ago. The payment was made through something called the Bennett Family Education Trust, and attached to the document? My name. Wait a second, I breathed. That's my fund. Nina nodded. Your grandfather's name is listed as the originator of the trust. Equal funds were set up for both you and Haley. I felt the floor tilt. For years, my dad told me I had nothing saved for school, that I had to take out loans, work extra shifts, and apply for every obscure scholarship I could find. But the money had always been there. He just decided I didn't deserve it. My hands trembled as I dialed Aunt Lila. She answered almost instantly. I was hoping you'd call. I told her what I'd found. About the trust, the payment, the lie I'd lived under for 4 years. She sighed, like she'd been carrying something heavy for too long. Chloe, your grandfather set up those trusts when you girls were babies. It was always meant to be equal. But when he passed, your father took over as executor, and he started making decisions your grandfather never would have approved of. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because we didn't know the full extent. Not until now. But I promise you this. We're going to make this right. There was something in her voice I hadn't felt in a long time. Assurance. Not just comfort. Resolve. That night, as I sat in Nina's apartment surrounded by open folders and legal printouts, I didn't feel powerless. I felt prepared. What now? She asked, brushing hair out of her face. Now we go deeper, I said. If they used my trust fund without permission, that's more than betrayal. That's misappropriation. Maybe even theft. Are you thinking about going to court? I hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of disbelief that I was finally saying it out loud. If I have to, yes. Around midnight, as I lay under Nina's worn but cozy blanket, I received one last voicemail. It wasn't from my parents. It was from my grandmother, my dad's mom, who rarely involved herself in family messes. Chloe, it's Grandma Ruth. I've just spoken with Lila. I had no idea things had gotten this bad. Your grandfather would be heartbroken if he saw what's been done in his name. I'm flying in tomorrow. Do not contact your parents until we've had a chance to talk. You're not alone anymore. I played the message twice, just to hear it again. It was the first time someone in my bloodline stood between me and the people who hurt me. And suddenly, I didn't feel like I was drowning anymore. I felt like I was finally swimming toward shore. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of toasted bagels and the distant sound of birds chirping outside Nina's window. For a moment, I almost forgot everything that had happened. But then my eyes landed on the folder sitting on the coffee table, full of documents, printouts, and the weight of 10 years' worth of quiet injustice. There was no going back now. And strangely, I didn't want to. By 9 a.m., Aunt Lila was parked out front, her old Subaru humming like an old friend. I climbed into the passenger seat, still gripping the manila folder like it might disappear if I let it go. She didn't ask many questions, just drove. We headed to her place on the edge of town, a cozy 2-story with wildflowers in the front yard and a worn porch swing that creaked in the breeze. It smelled like cinnamon and clean laundry, and for the first time in days, I felt safe. You can stay here as long as you need, she said, handing me a spare key. You're not a guest. This is your home too. That afternoon, the doorbell rang, and there she was. Grandma Ruth. I hadn't seen her since Thanksgiving 3 years ago. She'd always been kind but distant, the sort of grandmother who preferred peace over involvement, neutrality over conflict. But now? There was steel in her voice and purpose in her stride. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, clutching a leather satchel and an envelope marked legal. Let's sit, she said, already heading for the dining table. We have some things to discuss." Over the next hour, I listened as Grandma Ruth unraveled a truth I wasn't prepared for. When my grandfather passed, his will had clearly stated that equal trust funds were to be managed independently for both me and Haley. The executor, my father, had been given authority only with the agreement that he act in the best interest of both daughters, but he hadn't. He'd funneled nearly $24,000 from my fund to cover Haley's failed college attempts, her car repairs, and even a few family emergencies that I later learned were credit card bills from his own overspending. "We have records," Grandma said, tapping the envelope, "and we're filing for an emergency audit. My attorney will be handling it." I could barely speak. "Why didn't you know?" I asked, voice shaking. "Why didn't anyone stop him?" "Because he was clever," she admitted. "And we trusted him. But now we see it clearly. And Chloe, we are on your side." I sat there in stunned silence, absorbing the idea that not only had I been financially exploited, but the rest of the family had been lied to too. My father had spun the same story in every direction. That I was financially supported, ungrateful, moody, that Haley was struggling, trying her best, and just needed a little more time. The manipulation was so seamless I hadn't realized how deeply it ran. "He's not going to take this well," I murmured. "No, he won't," Grandma said. "But this isn't about his comfort. It's about your future." Later that evening, we were sitting on Aunt Lila's back porch when Nina arrived with Chinese takeout and a second-hand laptop she borrowed from her cousin. "Just until we get yours replaced," she said, setting it on the table. "And the cloud backup, some of it's there. Your thesis might not be lost after all." I blinked fast, swallowing back emotion. "I don't know what I did to deserve friends like you," I whispered. Nina grinned. "You existed." That was enough. Just after dusk, my phone buzzed with a new message. Not from my parents, not from Haley. It was from Mr. Klein, our next-door neighbor, the one who'd bought my laptop from my dad. "Chloe, I had no idea the laptop wasn't his to sell. I'm deeply sorry. I spoke with your grandmother today and I'd like to return it. I've already been reimbursed." My heart stopped. For days I'd mourned the data, my thesis, my portfolio, years of work gone in one selfish decision. Now there was a sliver of hope. Maybe this story wasn't just about losing everything. Maybe it was also about reclaiming what was mine. As night fell and the cicadas buzzed in the trees, I sat on the porch swing with a warm blanket wrapped around my shoulders and a new sense of clarity settling over me. There were still court proceedings ahead, still fallout, still complicated conversations I hadn't dared to imagine yet. But I wasn't afraid anymore, because I wasn't alone, because now they knew the truth. And for once in my life, I was being believed. The next few days passed in a blur of movement and muted chaos, but not my chaos, theirs. I was staying at Aunt Lila's now, tucked away in the quiet guest bedroom with lace curtains and a quilted bedspread that smelled like lavender. There were still moments I felt like I was floating outside of myself, watching this all unfold from a distance. But the more the truth spread, the more real it became, and the more undeniable. By the end of the week, word had spread across our family like wildfire. My folder, the one I had left on the kitchen table, had done its job. It had cracked the illusion wide open. And my father? He was scrambling. My cousin Eli, who lived just 2 blocks from my parents, called me one evening, whispering like he was passing along a secret. "Chloe, it's wild over there. Your dad's pacing the yard on the phone all day. Your mom's been calling everyone in the family asking for loans, says it's to help you get back on your feet, but it doesn't add up. No one's falling for it." "They're using me to get money now?" "Trying to, but everyone's comparing notes. They're starting to see what's really been happening. I just wanted you to know. People are taking your side." I wasn't sure how to respond. Gratitude? Relief? Grief? Maybe all of it. Because after years of being the invisible one, sidelined, silenced, expected to endure, suddenly people were seeing me and listening. The biggest surprise came late that Saturday afternoon when Aunt Lila peeked through the front window and muttered, "Well, that's unexpected." I followed her gaze. A silver SUV had just pulled into the driveway. Haley. She stepped out slowly, holding her phone in one hand and a paper shopping bag in the other. Her shoulders were hunched, her expression unreadable. I hadn't seen her since the night I packed up and left, since she smirked at me in the mirror wearing my blazer and called me dramatic. But now she looked different. I met her at the door before she could knock. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I hesitated, then stepped aside. 5 minutes. She sat at the edge of the kitchen chair like she didn't know what to do with her hands, or her guilt. "I didn't know," she said. "Not all of it. I mean, I knew Mom and Dad expected a lot from you, but I didn't realize they were taking your money, or using your trust fund, or—" Her voice trailed off. She reached into the paper bag and slid an envelope across the table. Inside, $800 in cash. "For the phone," she said. "I didn't know they sold your laptop for it. They told me it was a gift, that I earned it for my improved attitude at school." She let out a bitter laugh. "I guess I should have known better." I stared at her. This girl, this sister, who had taken so much from me without ever seeming to notice. And now, for the first time in her life, she looked like someone who didn't know which side she was even on. "Why are you here, Haley?" She bit her lip. "To apologize, and to ask, how did you do it? How did you keep going when no one saw you?" I swallowed the knot in my throat. I told myself if I could just make it through one more semester, one more bill, one more day, maybe it would all be worth it someday. "And was it?" she asked quietly. I looked around the kitchen, at Lila's soft humming from the living room, at the warmth of a home that didn't come with strings attached, at the folder now tucked safely in my backpack instead of buried under guilt. "It's starting to be," I said. Before Haley left, she turned to me again. "I think I want to study education. I never wanted business or pre-law. Dad said teaching was a waste of time, but I don't care anymore. I want to try." It hit me then. She hadn't just been favored. She'd been controlled too. Where I was made into a workhorse, she'd been made into a show pony, pampered, paraded, but never allowed to choose her own path. We were both casualties of the same system, just in different ways. As she reached the front door, she hesitated again. "They don't know I came here. If they find out, they don't get to dictate who you are anymore," I said, echoing Nina's words from days earlier. "Not to you, not to me, not to anyone." She gave me a look I didn't expect, one full of hesitation, sure, but also something else. Hope. Then she left. The sun was setting over Pine Hill as I stood in the doorway, watching her car disappear around the corner. It felt like something was shifting, slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. Maybe this story wasn't just about exposing the lies. Maybe it was about what came next, what could be rebuilt from the ashes. Because even broken bridges can be rebuilt, if both sides are finally willing to cross. The morning after Haley visited, the sky opened up in a soft Pacific Northwest drizzle, gentle, gray, and oddly comforting. Aunt Lila was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, humming to herself as she poured coffee into mismatched mugs. She handed me one without a word. No questions, no commentary, just quiet, consistent care. I sipped it slowly, grounding myself in the warmth, the smell of cinnamon toast, and the stillness of a home where no one yelled through walls or barged into my space without knocking. For once, I didn't have to brace myself. Around 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. Not urgent, not frantic, just 3 steady knocks. I glanced at Lila, and she nodded for me to answer. Standing on the porch was a man in a navy blazer, holding a thick white envelope and a briefcase tucked beneath his arm. "Ms. Chloe Bennett?" he asked. "Yes?" "I'm here on behalf of the Bennett Family Trust. I was appointed by Mrs. Ruth Bennett. These are legal documents pertaining to the emergency audit and court proceedings regarding your education fund." I took the envelope with both hands, suddenly hyper-aware of its weight. "The hearing has been scheduled for next Thursday," he added. "Your attendance is strongly recommended. Your father will be present. So will your grandmother and the appointed trustee." It was real now. Official, paperwork and courtrooms and signatures. This wasn't just a family feud anymore. This was legal territory. That evening, the living room became a quiet war room. Aunt Lila cleared the coffee table and spread out everything I had: receipts, texts, bank statements, printouts from the university portal, all organized, labeled, and backed up digitally. Grandma Ruth arrived just after sunset with a binder under her arm and a firm look on her face. "He's already hired an attorney," she said, settling into the armchair. "He's trying to frame this as a misunderstanding, as if he just got confused between the funds." "Confused for 4 years?" I asked. "While Haley was getting tuition payments and I was working 28 hours a week and taking out loans?" She shook her head. "You don't have to convince me, Chloe. I believe you. But we're going to need to show it. Not just emotionally, but factually, line by line." So we did. For hours. And somewhere in the middle of that quiet strategizing, I realized something. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was reclaiming myself. The next few days were a blur of notary visits, print shop runs, and phone calls from the family lawyer that made my stomach turn in knots. But I also received something I never expected: support. My Uncle Brian, who'd always kept his distance, sent me a message. "I read the folder. I believe you, Chloe. If you need a witness to any of the loans or family conversations, let me know. I remember more than you think." Even Eli, my cousin, offered to testify if it came to that. "It's about time someone stood up to him," he wrote. And then came the voicemail from my father. I almost didn't listen to it, but something inside me said I should. "Chloe, this is your father. I don't know what you're trying to prove with all this, but you're making a mistake. Families handle things privately. We don't drag each other into courtrooms. This is unnecessary. You're overreacting." He paused, then added, "Come home. We can fix this." But I wasn't interested in fixing things that were never whole to begin with. By midweek, I had moved fully into Lila's guest room. Nina helped me hang a corkboard by the desk and fill it with colorful Post-it notes, one for every goal I'd put on hold over the last 4 years. Finish my thesis, apply to internships, rebuild credit, take back my voice. The last one? She wrote it in glitter ink, because she knew it mattered most. Thursday morning arrived sooner than I expected. I woke up early, dressed in a blazer Haley had once tried to claim as hers, and stared at myself in the mirror. I looked older, not in a worn-down way, but in a way that said, "I've lived through something, and I'm still standing." Nina drove me to the courthouse. Her music was low, her energy calm. "Whatever happens in there," she said as we pulled into the lot, "you've already won something they can't take back. Your truth is out. Your story is yours now." I nodded, gripping the handle of the car door. It's time they heard it. And as I walked up those steps, heart steady despite the nerves, I knew something for certain. No matter what unfolded in that courtroom, I was no longer the girl who stayed silent at the kitchen table. I was no longer the one who gave and gave until there was nothing left. I was Chloe Bennett, and I had finally stepped into my own name. The courthouse smelled like polished wood and nerves, a mix of old paper, whispered tension, and someone's too strong cologne. I sat between Grandma Ruth and Aunt Lila at the end of the long bench, the folder I'd spent weeks compiling resting heavy on my lap. Across the aisle, my father sat with his attorney, buttoned up in a gray suit, jaw clenched, arms crossed like a man being inconvenienced, not challenged. My mother hadn't shown, no surprise there. She was never good at facing things head-on. But Haley was there. Quiet, small, sitting in the back row, hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't meet my eyes, but she didn't look away either. The judge was a woman named Honorable Vanessa Tran, mid-50s, sharp-eyed with the kind of presence that made the room fall silent the moment she entered. "This is a formal petition for financial misappropriation concerning the Bennett family trust," she began, voice steady. "Both parties have submitted documents and testimony. We'll begin with the trustee and legal counsel." The proceedings started slowly. Details, dates, signatures. My father's attorney tried to paint the picture of a well-meaning man who had simply misunderstood the financial instructions in the trust. "It was a family matter, Your Honor. Mr. Bennett was under the impression he had discretion." But the documentation told a different story. Every transaction, every withdrawal, every diverted payment from my education fund to cover Haley's tuition, car insurance, failed enrollment fees. I watched my father's jaw tighten with every sheet of evidence the judge flipped through. When it was my turn to speak, my legs felt heavy walking to the front. But the moment I stood behind the small wooden podium, something inside me steadied. "Your Honor, I never even knew this trust existed. I was told repeatedly that I had no financial support for school, that I needed to work 2 jobs, take out loans, and be grateful for what I had." I glanced at the judge, then at the papers in my hand. Meanwhile, those funds were being used behind my back to pay for my sister's expenses I was also being asked to cover directly. This wasn't confusion. This was control. There was a long pause. I took a breath and added, "And I'm not here to destroy my family. I'm here because silence didn't protect me, and because I believe financial exploitation, especially under the guise of love, deserves to be called what it is." Judge Tran didn't nod. She didn't need to. Her eyes said enough. What followed was a quiet reckoning. The new trustee, appointed by Grandma Ruth, confirmed discrepancies in the statements and stated that full restitution would be pursued under civil authority. The judge called it what it was, a breach of fiduciary duty. When she officially revoked my father's control over all remaining family funds and transferred oversight to a third-party fiduciary, he finally reacted. He stood abruptly. "This is absurd. She's my daughter. I was doing what was best for both of them." The judge raised one eyebrow. "Mr. Bennett, what you did may have started with paternal authority, but it ended with deception and theft. That is no longer in dispute." The courtroom fell silent again. Outside, the wind had picked up. A soft rain was starting to fall as I stepped down the courthouse steps, folder in hand, heart pounding. Haley was waiting near the curb, arms crossed, hoodie pulled over her head. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at the pavement. Then she looked up. "I didn't know it would go this far, but I'm glad it did." "You still want to go back to school?" I asked. She nodded. "For the right reasons this time, and I'll use my fund, not yours." It wasn't everything, but it was a start. That night, back at Aunt Lila's, we didn't celebrate. Not in the champagne-popping kind of way, but there was peace. Grandma Ruth stayed for dinner, pot roast and roasted potatoes, the kind of meal that filled more than your stomach. "You stood up for yourself with grace," she told me, hands warm over mine. "And now you've created space for healing, if they ever choose to accept it." I nodded, blinking back tears I hadn't let fall in court, because this wasn't a win I ever wanted. It was justice, but it still felt like loss. Later that evening, as I lay in bed, the room lit only by the soft glow of a desk lamp, I pulled out the list I'd written weeks earlier, my someday goals. I crossed off the first one, speak the truth, and then I wrote a new line beneath. The morning after the courtroom hearing dawned over Pine Hill like any other day, soft gray clouds rolling over the Cascades, the air crisp with the scent of damp earth. Yet for me, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The weight of what had unfolded still settled heavily in my chest as I sat quietly in Aunt Lila's kitchen, a warm mug of chamomile tea cradled in my hands. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon and old books, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. But here, in this moment, there was calm. The doorbell rang. 3 deliberate knocks, steady and unhurried. I glanced at Lila, whose knowing eyes urged me to answer. Standing on the porch was Haley. She looked smaller than I remembered, her usually confident swagger replaced by something softer, almost fragile. In one hand, she held a shopping bag, in the other, a tightly clutched envelope. She took a hesitant step inside, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the silence stretching longer than either of us wanted. Finally, she broke it, voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know, Chloe. Not the whole truth. I thought I was just lucky, that maybe my life was easier. But maybe I was trapped too." Her eyes searched mine, vulnerable and unsure. For the first time, I saw her not as the spoiled younger sister, but as someone struggling under the same heavy chains, just a different kind. "You were," I said softly. "You were controlled, not free. And I was made to carry everything they didn't want to." She reached into the envelope and slid a check across the table. The paper rustled softly as it touched the worn wood between us. "This is for the tuition your father said you'd have to pay for me. I earned it. Every cent." Tears welled in my eyes, not just for the money, but for the meaning behind it. The acknowledgement, the apology wrapped in dollars, a symbol of change. Our conversation unfolded like a fragile bridge, spanning years of misunderstandings and pain. Haley spoke of dreams she'd never voiced aloud, dreams of teaching, of a future in education, a path she'd been discouraged from pursuing by our father. She told me how, beneath the veneer of rebellion and carelessness, she'd felt lost and unheard. "I want to do something meaningful," she confessed, voice steady despite the emotions. "I want to teach kids. I want to make a difference." I smiled, a mix of hope and bittersweet relief washing over me. For the first time, she was choosing her own future, not the one scripted by our parents' fears and prejudices. As afternoon light shifted to dusk, the weight between us lifted slightly. There was no sudden forgiveness, no fairy tale reconciliation, but there was understanding. And maybe that was a beginning. Before she left, Haley hesitated at the door, her gaze flickering with uncertainty. "They don't know I came here," she admitted softly. "If they find out, it won't be good." "They don't get to control you anymore," I reminded her, echoing the words of our friend Nina. "Not to you, not to me, not to anyone." Her eyes met mine with something I hadn't seen before, a flicker of hope, a tentative promise to try. She walked away into the fading light, leaving me standing in the quiet hallway, the echoes of old wounds mingling with the possibilities of new beginnings. That night, wrapped in the comforting quiet of Aunt Lila's home and the steady presence of Nina by my side, I reflected on everything, on the journey I'd been forced to take, the battles, the losses, the unexpected allies. It wasn't just about reclaiming money or fighting legal battles. It was about reclaiming myself. I realized that healing wouldn't be linear or neat. There would be setbacks, angry phone calls, unanswered texts, maybe even silence. But I was no longer the girl who suffered quietly in the corner. I was Chloe Bennett, and for the first time in my life, I was choosing who I wanted to be. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change, a steady tide reshaping the contours of my life. I had spent years trapped in a cycle of sacrifice and silence, but now, with the trust funds secured under new management and the court ruling firmly behind me, I was beginning to breathe again. The freedom was exhilarating, but it was also terrifying. One morning in early spring, Aunt Lila handed me a business card. It was for a financial advisor named Samantha Powell, based downtown in Portland. "You're going to want to talk to her," Lila said with quiet confidence. "She understands what you're going through and how to protect yourself moving forward." I made the appointment that same day. Samantha's office was sleek and modern, a stark contrast to the worn leather chair I sat in. Her calm demeanor and professional insight grounded me in ways I hadn't expected. "We see cases like yours more often than people realize," Samantha said as she reviewed my documents. "Family financial exploitation is complex, wrapped up in emotion and history. But the good news is, you've already done the hardest part, documenting and standing up for yourself." She guided me through steps to secure my finances, opening new bank accounts with strict privacy controls, setting up alerts for any unauthorized transactions, and creating a budget that prioritized my independence. Together, we began crafting a plan not just for survival, but for growth. As the legal process unfolded separately with my grandmother and her attorney, I also focused on rebuilding my career. Through a connection from my old manager Tom, I secured an interview with Callahan Marketing Group, a respected firm downtown. Walking into their glass-fronted office building, dressed in modest clothes and carrying a hastily printed resume, I was nervous but determined. Allison Mercer, the hiring manager, greeted me with a warm smile. "Tell me about a challenge you've overcome," she said. I took a deep breath and shared a measured version of my story, not dwelling on the family drama, but highlighting the resilience and problem-solving skills I'd developed. "So you maintained a 3.8 GPA, worked 2 jobs, and supported your family through some pretty intense circumstances," Allison summarized, clearly impressed. "That kind of determination is exactly what we value here. We have a part-time marketing assistant position that could lead to full-time after graduation. The hours are flexible, and the salary is competitive." I accepted on the spot, feeling a spark of hope I hadn't felt in years. While I was building my professional life, I also began seeing Dr. Vanessa Torres, a therapist specializing in family dynamics. Our sessions helped me untangle the complicated emotions tied to my upbringing. She explained the golden child scapegoat dynamic, describing how families sometimes unconsciously create roles that serve the parents' needs rather than the children's well-being. "Your sister was idealized," Dr. Torres said during one session. "You were expected to be responsible, to sacrifice, to be invisible. But this wasn't your fault. It was the family system." Understanding this pattern didn't erase the pain, but it helped me release some of the guilt and shame that had weighed me down. Unexpectedly, Madison began visiting more often. With each visit, she shared fragments of family secrets and her own struggles, painting a fuller picture of the manipulations we'd both endured, though in different ways. "Did you know Mom and Dad have been in debt for years?" she confided one afternoon. "Dad made some bad investments, and they've been using the trust funds to cover it up." I nodded slowly. "That explains a lot. I never understood why they were always borrowing from me." Madison leaned in, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "They've been keeping us divided on purpose, making sure we never compared notes." The realization was both shocking and oddly validating. Our parents had deliberately manipulated us, ensuring we remained enemies rather than allies. Despite everything, Madison's transformation gave me cautious hope. She enrolled in the education program at the State University and moved into a dormitory on campus, her first real step toward independence. One evening, as we helped clean my apartment after a small dinner with Aunt Lila, Grandma Ruth, Nina, and a few new friends from work, Madison turned to me and asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't left?" I paused, considering the question. "Honestly, I probably would have kept giving until I had nothing left." She nodded quietly. "I'm sorry it took something so extreme to change things." I smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude and relief. Sometimes you need a clean break to build something better. As the guests filtered out and the night grew quiet, I stepped onto my small balcony overlooking the city lights. The past year had been challenging but transformative. I had defended my thesis, graduated with honors, and landed a job with growth potential. More importantly, I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me. My gaze lingered on Madison, who smiled back with a warmth I hadn't seen before. Our relationship, once fractured by pain and competition, was slowly healing. That night, as I blew out the 23 candles on my birthday cake, I whispered a wish. Not for something I wanted, but for the strength to continue building this new life. And for the first time in a long time, I felt content. The evening air in my downtown apartment was warm, carrying a gentle hum of city life below as I gathered with a small group of people who had come to mean the world to me. The room was filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the aroma of pasta and fresh salad, a simple meal that somehow felt like a celebration of everything I'd fought for. Olivia, my steadfast friend, had brought a bottle of sparkling cider, while Aunt Lila shared stories of resilience and family history that had been kept hidden for far too long. Grandma Ruth, now a pillar of strength in my life, raised her glass and smiled warmly. "To Chloe," she toasted, her voice steady yet filled with pride. "For the courage to stand up, the strength to rebuild, and the heart to forgive." The room echoed with gentle applause, and as I looked around at these faces, some family, some chosen family, I felt a surge of gratitude, unlike anything I'd known before. My parents were absent, but their absence was no longer a source of pain. Instead, it was a reminder of how far I'd come. Madison sat beside me, her expression soft and sincere. She had changed. The once carefree and distant sister was now someone I could truly see and respect. She'd enrolled in the education program at the state university, her dormitory a symbol of newfound independence. Over the past year, she had taken responsibility for her own path, no longer shackled by the expectations or manipulations of our past. As the evening waned, Madison reached into her bag and pulled out a folded check. She handed it to me quietly, her eyes meeting mine. "I saved this," she said softly. "It's for the tuition you were supposed to pay for me. I know it doesn't make up for everything, but it's a start." I took the check, overwhelmed by the gesture more than the amount. It was a symbol, a bridge between the fractured pieces of our relationship, a promise of something better. Later, as I stood on my balcony overlooking the city lights, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the betrayal, the long nights of doubt and fear. It all felt like a distant memory now, softened by healing and hope. In my hand, I held a small envelope, the deed to a modest piece of land nestled in the mountains, property that had been in our family for generations. Grandma Ruth had gifted it to me, a legacy of resilience and roots, a place to call my own. Tears welled in my eyes as I hugged her tightly, whispering my thanks for the gift and for everything she had done. As the guests began to leave, Madison lingered to help clean up. She paused, looking thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Dad hadn't sent that text last year?" she asked quietly. I smiled, the question echoing in my mind. "Honestly, I probably would have kept giving until there was nothing left." She nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "I'm sorry it took something so extreme to change things." "Sometimes," I replied softly, "you need a clean break to build something better." And as I closed the door behind her, the city lights twinkling below, I knew that for the first time, I was free to create a life on my own terms, surrounded by truth, respect, and genuine love. The morning air in Pine Hill was crisp and clear, the kind of fresh spring day that seemed to promise new beginnings even before the sun fully rose. I sat on the porch of the small cabin nestled in the foothills of the Cascades, its weathered wood smelling faintly of pine and earth. This was the land my grandmother had gifted me, a piece of our family's history, a place for healing and growth. I held the deed in my hands, turning it over slowly. It represented more than just property. It was a symbol of endurance, resilience, and the chance to create a future on my own terms. After all the storms, betrayals, and battles, I finally had a space that was truly mine. Behind me, the cabin creaked softly as the morning breeze played through the trees. I thought about the long journey it had taken to get here, the years of invisibility, the moments of heartbreak, and the strength it took to stand up and reclaim my life. And I thought about the people who had stood by me, the chosen family who believed in me when my own blood turned away. Aunt Lila, with her quiet wisdom. Nina, whose friendship was a lifeline. Grandma Ruth, whose fierce love helped right decades of wrongs. Even Madison, my sister, who had begun walking her own path toward healing. This land was a reminder that roots could run deep and strong, even through cracked and broken soil. It was a place to plant new seeds, to grow a life built on truth, respect, and genuine connection. As I stepped inside the cabin, the sunlight streaming through the windows warmed the worn wooden floorboards. I ran my hand along the rough-hewn table, imagining family dinners here, filled not with tension and silence, but with laughter and understanding. Later, in my downtown apartment, I sat with Madison over coffee, sharing plans and dreams rather than secrets and grievances. Our relationship was still fragile, but it was real, built on a foundation of honesty and forgiveness rather than fear and favoritism. That night, surrounded by friends and family who had chosen to be in my life, I stood before a birthday cake flickering with 24 candles. I closed my eyes and made a wish, not for riches or fame, but for the courage to keep moving forward, the strength to keep setting boundaries, and the grace to forgive, even when it was hard. When I opened my eyes, Madison smiled at me, her pixie-cut hair a symbol of her own transformation. "What did you wish for?" she asked. I smiled back, knowing that some wishes were meant to remain private. The past year had been the hardest and most transformative of my life. I had defended my thesis, graduated with honors, secured a job that challenged and fulfilled me, and built a community of people who truly cared. I was no longer defined by the shadows of my past, but by the light I was creating for my future. And as the candles burned low, I felt something I had never known before. Peace. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you've ever faced the pain of family betrayal or struggled to find your voice, remember, you are not alone. Like, subscribe, and share your story below. Your voice matters. Together we can heal and build better futures.